All right, good morning, everyone. This is the April 2nd morning work session of the Portland City Council. This continues our budget hearings. Today, we have the Portland Police Bureau, then the Bureau of Emergency Communications, Portland Fire and Rescue, Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, and then what is referred to as closing. And I assume that's a rousing speech at the end to send us off. Without further ado, we have the Portland Police Bureau here first. Chief, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir. I have with me, I have with me Assistant Chief Chris Davis, who's over the Bureau of Services, and Ms. Kathleen Ryland, who's our fiscal guru. We changed our slides to make them very short, sweet, and to the point.
Can you move the mic closer, please?
Yeah, I was trying to.
Carla, can you turn up the volume to wherever it was yesterday where we finally landed?
Is this? Mine don't go like this. This better?
Yeah, that's better.
I'll just have to have it right here in the front. So anyway, I wanted to thank everyone for the opportunity. I know there was a lot of work put into an analysis of what we put forth, and I know there's been a lot of thoughtful analysis and discussion around what we'll be requesting for this year. I want to start off by saying that this year we're really focusing on not asking for a lot more, but showing you what we've done in the last year, what we asked, because we realized that we really took up a substantial amount in our budget request last year. And then I'll lead us to our directives to develop, which are only a handful. This one?
Yeah. All right, we'll drive.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. So I want to start off with, again, this will be very high level because I know there'll be plenty of questions for us. Where we're going. When I got here, I had 3 goals, and that was 1.5 years ago. And it was not only to bolster our efforts around crime prevention and reduction, and then internally with our organizational excellence as it relates to reform, accountability, training, everything that it ensures that we work at our optimal and peak performances, but then also to make sure we had a focus on community engagement and inclusion. And so using the 21st century report on policing, those 3 goals, and making sure that we really focused on our internal and external communication, we established a vision. But I also recognize, can you skip forward to plan? Thank you. I also recognize that we had no roadmap. We didn't have a strategic plan. We didn't have a 5-year guideline or blueprint to help us understand what we needed to get there, whether that was resources with time, money, people, or just clear guidance as to what that looked like. So almost immediately, we put a team together. There was already a contract. We put a team together to work with the Coraggio Group to get the strategic planning process started. And from that, they used the settlement agreement that we're currently under, again, the 21st Century Task Force report on policing, and now, as we know, the Strategic Insights report that came out of a lot of the internal and external focus groups to steer their direction to get us, hopefully, to a written plan by this midsummer. Last summer, we knew, not last summer, last year, you knew we came in and we asked you for more personnel. We were short. Spent a lot of time talking about capacity versus demand. We asked for 93 bodies, we got 55 sworn. And I know the question is, well, what happened with those folks? As of today, the following progress has been made. We hired the 4 full-time employees in the training division, and they focus on procedural justice, implicit bias, officer wellness, and leadership development. We also hired 1 out of the 3 crime analysts hired in the internal audit team and professional standards. Unfortunately, we had 2 that didn't make backgrounds, and so we had to start over again. We hired the 2 full-time officer positions and the 2 additional contracted clinicians in the behavioral health unit. We've also gotten 2 of the records positions filled, and actually it's April. They'll be starting this April. We just wrapped up our hiring process there. We also have a full-time equity data analyst in the Equity and Diversity Office, and that's also expected to be filled by early April. The Houseless Community Engagement Liaison will be a part of the Central NERT team. That position has been posted, and I plan to interview the 2 finalists next week. Now, the question about all of the sworn bodies and vacancies, where are we with that? As of, I looked up the last numbers, or the most recent numbers, between February and March, as we expected, we lost 44 people due to retirement. 44. So when you add that to the positions that were already vacant, we are at 120 sworn vacancies, 39 non-sworn. The good news is that we have 48 bodies in the hopper, meaning that they're still on probationary status, but it still will not fill a significant gap with that. Moving on, when I talked about implementing 21st century policing principles, that also talked about being more focused in how we deployed our resources as we address crime. That was a huge focus of what I talked about last time, and the need of bodies, and we've done that. We've been very intentional, very strategic with how we address specific issues using data. And just a real high-level overview compared to the same time last year, just a quick first quarter comparison. We're down 2% against crimes, with crimes against persons, which includes a decrease in 2% of assault offenses. Crimes against property have been down by 9%, burglaries 3%, larceny 8%, motor vehicle theft 2%. Robberies are down 22%. Vandalism is down 7%. Crime against society, 3% decrease, for a total decrease in 8% compared to the same time last year. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but I think it's important given that that is the crux of what we deal with. And I want people to know that our efforts, we're starting to see some of our efforts come into fruition around that. When we talk about the settlement agreement that we've been in for quite some time, I've mentioned before that there are 121 paragraphs within the settlement agreement that are assigned to the city. And of those, 87 are very specific to PPV. Since 2017, 31 actions have moved from partial to substantial compliance. So what I'm saying is that we have 10 paragraphs left to gain substantial compliance. And substantial compliance meaning not we check the box, there's a policy in place, but it's that the DOJ and the COCO have observed not only have the policies been implemented, but it appears to have been institutionalized and ready for an observation phase. Of the 10 that are left, 3 are related to force, because we need to, actually these are technical. 2 are remaining as far as training, which the trainings are set for spring and summer as it relates to mental health. There is a particular scenario training set in service in August. And then there's 2 things left in accountability where the COCO needs additional time to assess data and confirm progress. And then, as we know, the bigger things are related to timelines with our work with IPR, and then also with PSEP to ensure that that's not only successful, but it's sustainable. What's most significant is that on March 4th, we received a letter from the Department of Justice with final approval of Directive 85020, which is police response to mental health crisis, stating that our system reflects local community ownership and a good faith successful effort in response to the concerns that brought forth the litigation in the first place. We're in the settlement agreement because of use of force against those who are mentally ill, and this is a very significant step since the inception of the settlement agreement. I'm trying to move quickly along here so we can get to questions. We also reconfigured our tactical operations division and how we respond to shootings here in the city. And I know when I got here, the GET audit was a big topic, and if you have questions around that, I'll be happy to talk about what's since been done with the recommendations. But we reconfigured and added more detectives in TOD to make sure that we were not only able to adequately address the increase in shootings that we've seen, but to make sure that we investigate all shootings and not focus on what we thought was solely a gang-involved shooting. By doing that, we've seen a lot of success. We've seen a 10% decrease in the amount of gang shootings because, again, focus efforts and providing more wraparound services to make sure we get ahead of identifying who's at risk of not only being a suspect but a victim, and then working with our city partners to make sure that our approach is not only comprehensive but making sure that people get the services that they need. And then lastly, real high level, we realize we're not going to get the bodies that we need right away for various reasons. And in the short term, we worked on a 4-shift reconfiguration, which takes the bodies that we already have available to us and looking at pulling officers from certain precincts to others, depending on call volume, to make sure that we free up officers' discretionary time to help with work-life balance, and to make sure that we are doing what we can to focus on response times as well. So I want to share with you that we are also trying to be proactive in utilizing and looking at the resources that we have to make sure that we can get to the same intended outcomes. Let me get to the next slide, please. How am I on time? Can we go back to strategy? I'll just briefly say, thank you. In addition to what's already been done, we still need resources. This is why we're here today. We still need the resources to not only sustain but improve our current processes and our systems. And the asks that we have today center mostly around infrastructure to make sure that we don't lose ground on the strides that we've already gained. We're asking for approximately, and I know everybody's going to cringe, but about $6.9 million in one-time costs. And the bulk of that is to address our issues with our region system. In addition to that, though, we're asking for 6 full-time positions as well. Thank you. It's coming along. It's coming along. So really quickly, this slide just talks about where the majority of our funding goes. Of our $229.2 million, the bulk, about 80% of our money goes towards personnel costs, but also a significant portion, about 48% of our resources are dedicated to core services. We have 11 program areas, but those core services specifically evolve around emergency response, traffic safety, and investigation. So I just wanted you all to see how our spending is laid out. I won't go too much further into that. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Commissioners. I've just talked briefly about our Police Bureau's racial equity plan. Like the rest of the city, the Bureau is committed to racial equity, building trust within our community, encouraging relationships between officers and the people they serve, all while making Portland a safer, more livable community. And in police, equity applies in 2 places, really. It applies in the delivery of police service, outward facing, and it applies in our relationships with our employees internally, our recruiting, hiring, promotional decisions, our discipline decisions, and all of our personnel processes. Like all bureaus, we have a comprehensive equity plan, which is on the website. We continue to update this plan and evolve it as needed. We work very closely with our Equity and Diversity Office on this. And really our goal is to embed the principle of equity in everything that we do, again, in both of the public-facing and the internal-facing areas. If you look in our program offers in our budget submission, you can see where we've listed the equity impacts of each of those programs. And I'll just give you one example for the sake of time. In the training division, in the last year and a half or 2 years, we have developed a really groundbreaking and I think revolutionary implicit bias and procedural justice training that has evolved from starting with the history of race relations in Portland and now moving into implicit bias and procedural justice concepts.
Thank you. The next slide goes into the challenges or significant issues. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Ryland. Staffing and recruitment, I mean, there's things up there that are identified as challenges, but these very specific issues that have been identified align with our directives to develop and why these positions or why this funding is so important to meet these needs.
Thank you, Chief. Can you hear me? Thank you, Chief. So knowing that the funds available for fiscal year 2020 were limited, the Bureau really tried to focus on things that were the most immediate needs for the Bureau. The region system, which is the Regional Justice Information Network, is one of our most immediate needs. Excuse me. The Police Bureau is facing a revenue shortfall due to the reduction in the number of region participants, issue number one. The Bureau is currently working with a consultant on developing an RFP for a replacement records management system. So that's issue number two. So our goal is to have an RMS system that is user-friendly, less expensive than the current RMS, and more efficient. The second greatest need is in our records division. We have a backlog of public records requests, and we also have a backlog in terms of putting data into the records management system. Records management system is vital because it is the repository of all police records. Public records requests are fulfilled using data that is accessed through the RMS. It's important to get data into this system as well so that we have timely data available for crime statistic reporting, which gives us a greater ability to focus resources on areas of greatest need. Accountability is another issue that it's actually sustainment of accountability. It's considered a best practice in law enforcement to have constant policy review and revision. It's considered a proactive approach. So it's our desire to build into our organization a sustained model of policy review and accountability, something that we started with the DOJ agreement, but we feel we need to build sustainability and longevity into that process. So at present, we have one full-time analyst and a limited-term analyst working on our directives review. We've put forth a request to institutionalize what is considered this best practice, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on the next slide. Communications. The Bureau's communications team consists of one sworn lieutenant and 3 professional staff. The small team has incredible reach, as our main Twitter feed has more than 180,000 followers. We've submitted a decision package to add a non-sworn public information manager to strategically plan and coordinate Bureau communications with the public. So this individual will be responsible for development of the strategic plan for communications for both internal and external communications stakeholders, to ensure that all members of the community have access to Bureau information, including policy and practice of the Bureau. We also want this person to proactively pair community events with the Bureau to further community engagement in Portland. Identifying reductions totaling $2 million as part of our 1% efficiency proved challenging for us. The majority of the 1% base budget cuts rely on cooperation from outside partners who also have limited resources. One of the programs that bubbled up as a reduction was our strength program, so that was submitted as part of our 1% efficiency reduction. So just in summary, I'll run through our directives to develop, which resulted in our decision package submissions. So we've requested one-time funding to backfill the revenue shortfall for the region system for the next 2 years. We've also requested one-time funding to stand up a new records management system. The amount is $4.97 million and is based on information that we received from our consultant. It's basically the median between their range of estimated cost. Our records division improvements, we are requesting ongoing funding for a Coordinator 1 position. This position will assist with the backlog of public records requests. We also are requesting ongoing funding for a night supervisor. We're currently using a training coordinator to act as the night supervisor, which is putting us behind in terms of training our record specialists. So we want to correct that so that we can get data into the system as quickly as possible. We're also requesting ongoing resources because we're eliminating records fees for crime victims. So we are requesting replacement of that. With our accountability package, we're requesting ongoing resources to convert our limited term analyst to a regular to assist with directives processing. We're also requesting funding for a city attorney that works with us in terms of getting our directives through the process as quickly as possible. We are requesting replacement of our strength programs. We did reduce them in terms of the 1% efficiency. We're asking to have those reinstated in our budget. And we're asking for the non-sworn public information manager. So again, we're asking for ongoing resources of about $700,000, one-time resources of $6.9 million.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
I'll start, if I may. Thank you very much for your presentation. Chief, if you could send me your remarks. I'm very much a reading learner, and so I didn't have those numbers that you gave, and I'd like to have them for reference in the future. Thank you for the information. For the most part, I agree with the City Budget Office's recommendations, but I'm noticing that you're requesting to transfer $16 million from exterior materials and service into personnel, leaving still $13 million. The direction from the mayor was to not cut frontline services for the 1% reduction. Why did you propose to cut the strength programs when you're taking exterior materials and services for most of your cut, and yet you didn't, you chose to cut the strength programs instead of a little bit more from exterior materials and services?
What we discovered was we had under-budgeted personnel services this fiscal year, so part of our strategy was to properly fund personnel services. That left most of the remaining funding. I mean, we were instructed that Personnel services were not going to be part of the 1% reduction, so that leaves us with materials and services, and that's where we focused most of our reductions.
I appreciate that, but if you're already taking 1.1 million from exterior services, I don't see why you couldn't take another 300,000 for the strength programs. And yeah, we haven't had this conversation with this particular council, but Commissioner Fisher and I have had it many times before. The strength programs are the most popular thing that the Police Bureau does, period. And I think essential to the community, essential for public safety. They're essential for getting upstream from the sexual violence that we have in our community, which we're nationally shamed for. And so we've multiple times in the past, the council has said, do not cut the strength programs, do not offer the strength programs. In fact, your budget does point out that the cost of the program is about 300,000, but the cut was only 200,000 or in round numbers, because one of the positions is limited term. I would suggest that we make that full term, a permanent position, and take it out of exterior materials and services. So that's one thing. I do want to correct the record on page 15 of the City Budget Office's discussion that in 2014, then Office of Neighbourhood Involvement was considering taking on the program, and it says that Civic Life had concerns about its ability to manage the program, and that may have been what was put out in public, but again, behind the scenes, the conversation with Mayor Hales and with the Office of Neighbourhood Involvement was, this is a very popular program, that it's really important for people to see that the police do this in the community. And the City Budget Office says that only 11 Bureau staff participated in Voice Strength. I thought, wow, 11 volunteered for Voice Strength? It's dozens of hours of volunteer time to get the training, and then at least a dozen hours a month to actually teach the classes. So the fact that we've got 11 officers who are wanting to do that in a program to teach teenage boys how to treat people with respect, I think is absolutely phenomenal. So again, please don't please let's put the strength programs on a course that they're not constantly being put up for cuts. And one other thing about the transfer of the however many, what's the 16 million transfer. There's clearly, as you say, a huge structural problem with the personnel budget and the other parts of the city budget, of the police budget. So that's something that I hope you are going to take the budget officer's advice and really do a deep dive to right-size it. It doesn't feel sustainable moving forward.
Thank you, Chief, for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. I understand that we continue to talk about how short-staffed Portland Police is. At this particular time, we have 44 retirements, you have 120 vacancies, you mentioned. And so I have a question about the secondary employment program. It appears that if we eliminated the secondary employment program and allow those private businesses to hire private security, that we would reduce costs of having police at these private facilities doing police work when they're actually not being paid by the police. So would you like to, I see you're getting ready. Would you like to respond to that?
Sure. Thanks. In theory, secondary employment is supposed to be cost neutral to the city. We have in our proposed budget this year put forth an adjustment to the reimbursement for that to make sure that we're recovering all of our costs. But the way it's supposed to work is secondary employment doesn't cost us anything. Where it causes us problems is that it takes limited personnel resources that could be doing other things instead of that secondary employment work, and that's an ongoing discussion that we're having internally about where that balance is. But what I would suggest is looking at it not as a dollar cost that the city is paying, because we shouldn't be paying anything for this. We should be recovering all of our costs. It's just we have a limited number of police officers, and it's their time. Does that make sense?
Thank you for that. I appreciate the response, but I would think that if a police officer is working in a Portland police uniform and there's an arrest made, then he would call other police officers, and then those police officers and resources are at the scene. And so it does have additional costs, as I think that's not directly related to that individual who's doing the overtime, but that's just one. Let's go to school resource officers. We have, again, a limited number of police officers, so I would have the expectation that we would be contracting rather than expanding out and doing more things for more people. And so have you considered actually putting school resource officers into patrol positions so that we have more officers that are available for patrols?
The answer to that is yes. Ultimately, though, we want to get to where every officer, at least those who work the day shifts, have the same training that our current school resource officers have. So there's some costs associated to that. We're open, obviously, to looking at different ways to providing the same services. But at this point, I think the question on the table is, after we met with the school districts, it's not a question of whether or not they want us there. It's what do the numbers look like and who's going to pay for it. So we are currently reviewing some reconfigurations, but ultimately I still want to make sure that if we pull out completely, whoever responds still can respond with the same level of training and relationships that our current SROs have.
Do you consider your staffing levels at a critical stage at this moment?
I would say yes. I think it was a year ago as well, especially as the city continues to grow and the infrastructure of the city is not growing with that. It's critical because, and that's why I'm saying we're proactive in finding ways internally to deal with this, with what we have. It's a Band-Aid approach, but ultimately it's not just a dollar cost, it's a cost on officer well-being and burnout as well. So if we don't get ahead of this and address it, we're not going to have the people to do the work that we're asking them to do.
If I may. I understand from my calculation that we have 294 supervisors/command staff. We have 351 officers available for patrol, and we have 155 in quote-unquote specialty units. Is there a way to reconfigure your workforce so that we actually have more officers on the street rather than in supervisory or specialty units?
I'm sure there is a way to flatten the hierarchy, but the issue with that is we have to make sure that we maintain systems of accountability, chain of command, span of control, especially on the street. And what we're also missing is that we want officers on patrol, but we need, say, for example, the best case scenario, we can fill all of our open districts and our positions. That generates more reports. That means people need to investigate and follow up, and we're still lacking as far as our investigators go as well. Another question to ask, however, and I don't think we've had this done since I've been here, is to take a look at, and obviously there's contractual implications here, but to take a look at the positions that we have that are currently filled by sworn members that could be civilianized. I know we've started some efforts in those areas with background investigators and some other places, but I think we could benefit from that as well.
Thank you, Chief, for that answer. My calculation says you've got about 2.5 supervisor/command staff for every one officer. That seems really, really, really top-heavy. And I have two more questions, and then I'll be done. Did you want to respond to that?
No,
Assistant
so
Chief.
we were just talking about a lot of the positions that you're referencing as far as the supervisors go are required by the DOJ in the settlement agreement. So when we talk about span of control, when we get our officer numbers up, we're going to need enough supervisors to make sure the span of control is there. I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, your question is, until we get there, is there something that we can do about that? I'm sure there's contractual implications around that, too. Once someone is already established in a rank without cause, demoting them to a different classification, I don't think is something that's doable.
I appreciate that response, Chief. I just think that in a crisis with limited employees, that we have to be creative in how we use the limited resources that we have. And I guess my concern is that if we continue to do everything we've always done, being down 120 officers, we're not going to be effective at anything that we try to do. Two more
Thank you.
questions. I noticed that with the school resource officers, we still have a over majority of African Americans being arrested. And I'm very concerned that what the Portland Police Bureau reflects as far as who gets arrested on the street is also reflected in the school resource officers. So I'm very concerned about that. And my very last question, honest, is around the records management system. I am very concerned that the Police Bureau is asking the City Council to fund their mistake. We are in a contract that increases the cost for Portland Police Bureau the more jurisdictions drop out. That's not an acceptable contract for us to actually be in. And I think that the Police Bureau should have responsibility for fixing that mess.
So if I can comment, thank you for both of those comments. As it relates to the arrest, bless you, the arrests of students, arrests for youth are a little bit different than those of an adult. And of those arrests that were referenced in the CBO report, with the exception, I think, of maybe 3 or 4 of those, all of those arrests or contacts that were made were self-initiated. They weren't, or not self-initiated, they were a result of someone calling us. But they didn't necessarily result in someone being in custody. Oftentimes, they were returned to school or home for home.
I'm sorry, Chief, these were arrests made by the school resource officer.
Yes, that is correct. So the school resource officers respond to calls for service specifically by the schools. And so these, when we say arrests, the term arrest doesn't mean the same thing for a youth by Oregon law as it does for an adult. So it's not an actual arrest. It's arrest. The term arrest is used when we initiate paperwork. When we go to school, we take a report, we start the case. But it does enter them into the criminal justice system in one way or the other, but it's not a physical arrest. But I'm sharing that to say all of the calls, it looks like it's disproportionate, but it wasn't as a result of us initiating it. It was a result of the school initiating the calls to us, and we responded. The second piece you were talking about, remind me again, because I thought I had a good one. Oh, the RMS in region. I agree with you that it's not a good contract. It was poorly executed, but this was something that the city signed off on. So while it's something we're left carrying the bag with, this was not something that PPB entered and initiated on its own. So we're seeking help from the city to help get out of the bind that the city entered us in. Respectfully.
Could I just add a little commentary here? First of all, on region, because that's a sore spot with me as well. But Chief, you beat me to the punch. The City Council approved region, and they approved the contract with a clause in it that said that if any of our regional partners who went into the program with us backed out, we would pick up that cost. And we will never sign a contract like that again. And I've made that very, very clear to legal counsel. Do not bring contracts like that to the City Council. Number 2, the contract, unbelievably, which was approved by the City Council, has no opt-out for the City of Portland. There is no way to get out of that contract with notification or otherwise. So it requires effectively us to continue to pay off the contract. The question was raised, and by the way, we won't sign any of those either, and we won't see those as a council going forward. Number 3, there was the broader question, which I thought was a great discussion, maybe it was yesterday or last week, around technology generally. And the Chief Administrative Officer, Reinhardt's been looking at, can we create a centralized stage gate process or some opportunity through the Bureau of Technology Services or elsewhere where all of our technology platforms are evaluated through a uniform process and a transparent process so that we don't have individual bureaus out there making do on their own. Chief, you mentioned the SRO piece, and I just want to make sure I have my statistics correct on that. You had said some time ago that there was something, or maybe it was even AC Davis, that there were approximately 5,400 calls, and I think that was just from PPS in 1 year. Does that ring a bell?
I don't have the stats in front of me,
But it's several thousand, right?
It's thousands of calls.
Thousands of calls, and those are
That
initiated not by the police bureau, those are calls that are initiated from the community by the schools,
Correct.
school administrators, teachers, parents who happen to be on site. Then the police get involved, the SRO gets involved, and my understanding is there was a total of like 38 arrests. And as you said, many of those arrests are adjudicated by having the parent come and get the child, or the child is returned to the classroom. And in a very small number, I think it was 6 cases out of those thousands of calls, there was actually a custody situation.
That's correct.
The alternative world isn't that that doesn't happen. The calls will still come into the police bureau. The question is who's going to respond. And that gets to the question you raised, Chief. If we don't have somebody who goes through that specialized training that SROs go through, working with kids, restorative justice, de-escalation strategies specific to youth, having those relationships with the youth in the schools, it's whoever the beat cop at that particular moment is who will show up maybe with or without that training. So it's still going to happen. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The issue of secondary employment, and we've had lots of conversations about this, I share my colleagues' frustration around secondary employment, but aren't there some contractual obligations there? I mean, if we
Yes.
wanted to, if we decided as a council today, we want to eliminate secondary employment, can we do that?
We would need to have that discussion with the union and labor relations, and that's the short answer.
It's in the contract that they can do secondary employment?
It's in the contract how it is administered, and I'd have to go back and look at the specifics. I mean, you get too far into contract law and you want to have the contract in front of you. But implicit in that is the past practice of maintaining secondary employment. And, I don't want to get too far into labor negotiations. I think that's maybe a little far afield here, but I don't want.
It's a follow-up question then, because it's
Yeah.
my understanding that there are some bargaining issues involved, and I guess I'd like clarification on that. So if somebody could get back to us either from the Bureau or
Yes.
from Labor Relations, I would
At a
appreciate
minimum, I would
that.
expect a past practice argument.
Okay, and Chief, in response to the question about staffing, I would argue that our staffing is most certainly at a critical stage. And we went through the effort last year to fund additional positions, and frankly, the recruiting has been problematic, and I think we've talked publicly about the challenges of recruiting police officers nationally and here locally, specifically in Portland, Oregon, although I have to say I'm really proud of the new recruit classes that we are seeing. We're seeing very, very high-quality, talented applicants. But it's not just on the sworn side that we're struggling. I believe we have 30 or 40 unfilled vacancies on the non-sworn side as well. So as with many bureaus in the city of Portland, the police bureau is struggling. The problem is we're now going into this national hiring crisis around police officers being way down in terms of our staffing level relative to other cities our size that have substantially more police officers than we do. So we're going to have to work with you and figure out how best to deploy those resources. Commissioner Daly.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to start with my least favorite topic, which is software. I also inherited a very thorny software issue with BDS, so I sympathize, and I sympathize with the situation. You're asking for financial support from the city. Are you getting any support from the Technology Oversight Committee or BTS staff?
Yes, we've been working closely with BTS staff to
What about the, sorry.
figure out the plan.
And the TOC?
We have not been before the TOC at this point.
I'd like to suggest.
Commissioner Daly, for the record, Tom Reinhardt, CAO. The project would only come in front of the TOC if there's a new implementation. Right now, it's an existing platform running under an existing contract. But if there's a re-up or a change to another vendor, of course, it'll come in front of the TOC.
I hope there's not a re-up.
Well, did
Not
they
of this
review-
contract.
Did they review it in the first place?
I don't know, I have to get back to you on that, it's before my time, but I will check with Bureau of Technology Services.
So I'm going to just run through a few issues and focus on staffing at the end. Secondary employment, something that I haven't been real cognizant of until this moment. It's concerning to me that we already have police officers that are doing a lot of overtime within the Bureau, and then come to find out we have officers who are working outside the Bureau. And overworked, tired officers are not good news for anyone, for community members or for the Bureau or for those individual officers. So I'm very interested in that topic and wondering, do we have a bunch of part-time police officers that work part-time secondary jobs, or these are full-time officers who are working? Okay, can't get enough. All right. I want to support Commissioner Fritz in her plea to not cut the strength programs. This is a relatively cheap program that delivers significant benefit to the community and really powerful outcomes for the participants. It is an upstream solution. I think it's a very smart investment in public safety, and it's the kind of thing that I would certainly support through Civic Life, current crime prevention programs, soon to be renamed and really refocused on helping community members work better together, solve their own problems, and decrease reliance on police. And, it's not just learning to fight off an attacker. It's really having an awareness of your surroundings and having that confidence of knowing you know how to protect yourself changes the way you move through the world and makes you less of a target for predators. So I would not support cutting that program. I have really mixed feelings about the school resource officers. I've met with the members of that program. I think they're wonderful officers. I think they have the kinds of training that I would like to see all the officers have around de-escalation and harm reduction and trauma-informed approach. I do think that they are minimizing youth's interaction with the justice system, and I would be worried if we completely eliminated that program, but I do wonder if their time is being used effectively, or the way we're kind of distributing those services. I just think it's something we really need to delve into, because like the mayor mentioned, if we take away the SROs, the phone calls don't go away. And who shows up to deal with those youth is important. Oh, good, that's not me. Really disappointed to see there's no request for increase in traffic enforcement. I've been trying to dig up some numbers really quick, which I haven't been able to get all the numbers I want, but I want to point out that in 2018, we had 27 murders in Portland. We had 34 people die in traffic deaths. We are seeing rampant disregard for the law and for human life on our streets. And that division, I think, is seriously understaffed. And the city has adopted Vision Zero, which is reducing and eliminating traffic deaths. And we're, diligently working on that through PBOT. We can't do that without the support of the Police Bureau. We can't accomplish our goal without the support of the Police Bureau, so that's a concern. And then finally, the staffing levels, and I feel like a broken record because I'm going to say the same things I said last year. We know that almost half the phone calls coming into BOEC are low-priority calls, and a lot of them could be diverted and don't require sworn officers. I know there was a pilot program. It looks like it was modestly successful. I believe that with more staff time put into it or a whole other approach to dealing with those phone calls, that we could see much more significant reductions. I still don't know the rationale for police staffing for the city of Portland. I know it's a complex equation. No one has ever shared that with me. So I can't support increasing positions until I understand what the rationale is. And it's especially hard for me to understand a request for more officers when we have 120 sworn vacancies with only 49 officers in training. So that brings it down, right? It's 120 minus 49. Someone do the math for me real quick. 71 vacancies, 39 non-sworn. I think the Bureau could use existing resources more efficiently and effectively if work that doesn't require a sworn officer was delegated to non-sworn staff. And we deal with this massive volume of phone calls coming into BOEC that aren't actual emergencies, which brings me to SROs, something that I think community was really hopeful about and is still waiting for. Can you tell me what the new timeline is for those positions being filled? Because I think they...
Which ones, the PS3s?
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry,
PS3s.
sorry, I made the wrong note here. PS3s, because I believe those positions were approved by council before I got here.
Right.
And it's been over 2 years.
So we have accepted well over 100 applications for that program. We took the first batch of those, and out of 70 of this initial batch, 60 people met the basic requirements. We've actually gone back now to the well of applicants and taken the next 100 to start getting them through the process. We sent 61 people to background investigations so far from this initial group. 3 have passed. We have had a very high background failure rate. Of the 3 who've passed backgrounds, in that process we lost 1 to another agency who became a police officer. So we have 2 that we have offers for. They're already city employees, so the plan is to leave them in place until we have at least a group of 6 and can start a training class. Once we have 6 and we can start the training class, that basic training program is ready to go at the training division. They're working on a field training manual as we speak. There's some policy, some house cleaning that needs to be done with some policies that we're working on. And the plan right now is once we can get to the initial 6 PS3s, we'll continue hiring the other 6, but we'll deploy the first 6 and start a pilot program with them at this point, it looks like East Precinct because of the analysis that we've done. The call load at East lends itself the best to them of the 3, at least initially, when we only have 6 of them to work with. And then we'll do a program evaluation to see what the impact was of those people in the first year.
Are PS3s, they need to pass the same background check that a sworn officer would pass?
Yes, ma'am.
And what are some of the most common reasons for someone for failing the background check?
And background failures are not just a problem with PS3s. We have a huge problem with that with sworn officer applicants. But the biggest things that we see these days are drug use, dishonesty that we uncover in their background, their self-admissions. We're seeing less and less financial issues. The really big thing these days is drug use.
Does that include cannabis?
Less so because, and this is where I want to be really careful, because one of the most closely guarded secrets in any law enforcement agency is its drug guidelines, because you don't want candidates to come and see what they need to tell you. But we have been open as, you know, as marijuana use has become legalized in Oregon. We, I believe, still post on our website our cannabis guidelines. We cannot legally employ a police officer under federal law who has used marijuana within the last year. So if you've used marijuana in the last year, we can't employ you as a police officer. With non-sworn folks, I believe it's 4 months.
I think
And
I
we
just
can't have you use
discovered where our
employee.
problem is, everybody.
So what's
Not to joke.
are
Thank
the
you.
federal rules on who can be a police officer?
So the way that works, and it has to do with marijuana still being illegal at the federal level. And there are federal laws against transferring firearms to anyone who is considered under federal law a drug user. That we have, and the city attorney's office and us have interpreted as anybody who's used an illegal drug in the last year. And because cannabis is still scheduled federally, we can't legally transfer a firearm to someone who's used it within the last year.
So then can they be PS3s?
They absolutely can.
I have one quick question. Right now, I noticed that 60% increase in calls for Portland Police to show up are disorder calls, which means that there's an unwanted person, there's people are uncomfortable with the individual that shows up. If we're able to take 60% of those calls off your plate by doing something innovative and creative in partnership with the mayor and the other city commissioners, that would significantly help your ability to actually do the job of being a police officer. Would that be a correct statement?
Absolutely, and we had a great meeting a couple days or so ago with BOIC staff in looking at how we could not just sustain, I'm convinced, sustain our current pilot program there, because I was concerned about keeping a sworn body there in the dispatch center, but it's actually shown some good proven result. But also moving the officers that we have assigned to our telephone reporting unit under that same umbrella, so we can increase our capacity to take reports over the phone instead of having to dispatch an officer out there. So we are looking for ways to not only sustain that, but to partner, and we would certainly look forward to a decrease in the amount of calls that we're being dispatched to that don't require a sworn officer.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you very
Good
much for
morning.
your presentation. I just had a couple of questions. First of all, as a prior school board member, I just want to say how much we appreciate the work of the SROs in Portland Public Schools anyway, and I hope that that program continues. That specialized training for those officers really makes a difference, and I think that the exposure to the students of an officer in that way is very helpful down the line. But my real questions had to do around recruitment, and I was curious what your biggest challenges are around recruitment. And then I was very surprised that you had the 340 days to hire. That seems like if I was somebody looking for a job, I wouldn't want to wait a whole year before I got a yes. So I'm just curious about both of those.
I'll let Chief Davis talk about our recruiting efforts, and I'll chime in anything that's not covered.
Sure, and we have, that time to hire is a huge issue for us, and we have reduced that significantly through some efficiencies we've recognized in our personnel division. We're running around, I think it's about 6 months total from the time of application, and really the big time suck in all of that is the background investigation. And on the one hand, you want to get that done quickly, but on the other hand, you want to get it done right. Where we have room for improvement there a lot of times is with our applicants, because we can only process that background so as fast as they and their references respond. So we're looking at some online ways of doing that are a lot faster than the old snail mail. But we really, for a lot of that process, are at the mercy of the applicant's references and how fast they can get that information turned around and back to us. We have seen an increase, at least, in the number of applications we're getting a month. We're currently averaging about 103 applicants a month, which is up. But obviously, that's still not going to meet our needs very quickly. So we're working a lot with BHR right now in ways that we really never have before. And Human Resources has been great at directing some of their recruiting resources to us, and then working with us on some data that we can use in terms of applicant demographics. So there's a lot of promise in that approach.
So who are your greatest competitors then? Who are you losing out to?
We lose out to, so we're all fishing from the same pool or the same pond. We lose out to other agencies, right, like teachers. We compete with other agencies throughout the state, but then also nationally. So as agencies expand their efforts to recruit, they find themselves going to recruiting fairs, career fairs, not just where they are centrally located. And then they incentivize by signing bonuses or more pay, less work, sorts of things. Working here in Portland is unique, and it's been recognized all over the country that the nature of policing is not only challenging, but it's just here in the city because of the nature of work, the types of issues that we deal with. We deal with demonstrations, protests, crowd management things. We catch a lot of headlines. And quite frankly, folks would rather go to other agencies and make similar or more money for less scrutiny. You also find that agencies that are under a settlement agreement have far more layers of oversight. And for those change agents or those who aren't organically change agents, they're not going to automatically want to come and do this sort of work because there's a lot of heavy lifting that takes place there. So again, there are places where they can go where the work is a little bit easier, but the climate here in the city is a lot different, and that's recognized all over the country as well.
Sounds very similar to the school districts.
Yes.
Dr. Smith?
Just quickly, could you all speak a little bit about some of the successes you've seen from your racial equity plan, and then some areas of challenge as OEHR is trying to make sure that we're continuing to support what's happening
You want to
in
start and I'll
bureaus?
finish?
Yeah, sure. I think, some of the biggest successes we've seen just in the last year and a half in our racial equity plan is we've gotten a lot more clarity about where the areas are. And, if you don't have to do it right now, but if you go back and you look at the slide from our slide deck, you can see the areas in the Bureau that we've identified where we need to focus to embed that into our work. On a more fundamental level, though, I think we've seen just a change in the conversation internally about equity, and I'm seeing a lot more receptiveness and a lot more understanding just on the part of our rank and file employees of what equity is and why it is important to their work.
But I chime in and say I am encouraged by the foundation work that's been established, but I'm looking forward to being able to measure how we've institutionalized it in the same way that we've done with the rollout of our implicit bias training, our procedural justice training. It's known now by anyone who puts together a lesson plan that before it's even turned in to me, the facets or the principles of these things are embedded throughout. And I'm looking forward to implementing the equity tool that we're working on, so we make sure that lens is applied to everything that we do as well, not just with training, but also with any incident action plan before we roll out a major response to a protest or a demonstration, not just budget, but for any strategy that we put forth. So I'm looking forward to being able to roll that out in the next couple of months as well. You're welcome.
Frida, you get the last word.
Oh, is it that late? But I have lots of words.
You get lots of words.
Only one. Yeah, well, I'll hit SROs first, because I met with the police chief the other week with our superintendents, and I appreciated that. At David Douglas, we support SROs 100%. We feel they're valuable. Unlike the other high schools in the city, we have 3,000 students. It's like a little city. And so having them available who understand students, we feel they keep so many of them out of the justice system that could be. In fact, upon my recommendation, our high school principal is now collecting the data on how that works. It appears no one's been collecting the data on these positive results. We also have been meeting with our community, asking specifically, because I strongly believe, having been on the school board for 28 years, you often just hear the loudest individual. Not that they represent your whole community, they're just the loudest. And we're finding with our meetings with our minority, our different ethnic groups and stuff, it's understanding what an SRO does. Once they understand what they're doing, they're not quite like a regular police office, they're very supportive. So we're on a campaign to make sure our community understands that. So we support 100% keeping them. Now on to recruitment. As Pam says, you're just like us, our school district. We have the same issues. What's required in an education level for a police officer? Things change, that's why I'm asking.
Either 2 years of college, an equivalent amount of military experience, or previous employment as a full-time sworn police officer.
Okay. And do you know, when it comes to the educational institution, higher ed, how many are in the pipeline looking at criminal justice or any of those areas?
We don't know. What we have done is we've gone to some places like John Jay College in New York that has a very large, diverse, robust criminal justice program and recruited specifically there. That's one of the, I don't want to give too many of our trade secrets to our competitors, but that's one of the initiatives that we've tried over the last couple of years to increase the pipeline.
I was just communicating with your colleges throughout Oregon to see what their pipeline and recruitment into those programs are. We've done that in our high school when we were looking at diversifying our teaching staff. We discovered there was only, I think it's about a year ago, less than 200 people students of color that got certification, and there's 199 school districts. So getting a diversified staff was not going to do too well, but it made us understand what we needed to do. You have a lot of non-sworn people in your staff. Do you recruit from them?
Yes.
Do you provide assistance? Because we're having the same problems, we are now working with our classified staff on those that want to become teachers and finding a way for them to go back to school at no cost. Of course, we come from a low-income area, so a lot of them can get the Pell Grants, but helping them get through the system so they can become teachers and still be able to work their job during the day. So it might be something you may want to consider doing is how can you, if you have people who really would like to become police officers, how can you help them if they financially don't have the funds to do it? Just a couple of suggestions because we have the same issues.
Very good. Chief, thank you. As always, great presentation. And I'll put in a little plug for the chief here. She appeared on Think Out Loud this week. That's available on the OPB website. And I thought it was great. So I encourage people to listen. Chief, you are turning the ship around, you and your team. I want to thank you for the great work you do and the men and women of the Portland Police Bureau. Thank them as well on our behalf.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll take a, how long, Commissioner, would you like? We'll take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to hear from the Bureau of Emergency Communications, the Fire Bureau, and PBEM.
Hold up for a second.
Could you pause for a moment?
According to staff in my office, it's still playing music, and because this doesn't have captions, I'm being told that it was going to get live captioned. So I just want to, it's now great. Thank you very much.
Would you like us to restart it?
Yes, please.
Yes, start.
Thank you.
I had seen a lot of smoke from a fire in northeast Portland. There's just huge billowing black smoke.
There is a car metal plate next to us and it is on fire. There's equipment that's on fire.
There's a ton of black smoke coming up in the air.
There's a giant plume. It might be coming from the junkyard.
911, what's your emergency? We have a fire.
And what's on fire?
I'm not sure. We have scrapyard.
Okay, so a fire in the scrapyard?
Yes.
This is Fire Dispatch, Kelly Box number 1213, reporting about residential fire. Northeast 7 side of Killingworth. They're seeing black smoke. They've got a 20-foot pile of cars that are burning. Fire Dispatch calling a second alarm. Fire Dispatch, we're calling a third alarm. We're going to a fourth alarm. Calling a fifth alarm. Northeast 75 in Killingworth Street.
BOEC's role in any major event is to answer 911 calls for that event. And we got 106 911 calls specifically related to the Cully fire from 9 o'clock in the morning to 10:15 that morning. The primary interface that we have in this case is with the Portland Fire Bureau, dispatching the resources that they're requesting through that process. Primary communication mechanism is, of course, the radio, but we share a lot of information via the computer-aided dispatch system as well. In addition to that, the Portland Fire Bureau has a liaison on duty who assists our dispatchers and helps them in determining appropriate resources for a call.
Killingsworth Scrapyard fire quickly went up to a fifth alarm response, which meant we had approximately 100 firefighters and approximately 30 apparatus there.
We work with BOAC and they provide us an automatic page to our cell phones. At about 9 a.m. we got the first page telling us that it was a third alarm fire. Pretty successively after that, it became a fourth alarm fire and a fifth alarm fire. And we spent the day monitoring that incident and making sure that protective actions were taken for the public. So basically that's for the public, either you're gonna evacuate or you're gonna stay inside your house and you're gonna close the windows and the doors and you're gonna turn off your AC. Sacagawea Head Start was really close to where the fire took place. So we coordinated with Portland Public Schools to make sure that the students, especially since they were in preschool, were evacuated right away.
We continue to communicate with the BOAC dispatchers after we've arrived on scene. So they've updated us throughout our response. Once we arrive, any needs that we have is requested through dispatch. So after the first units arrived on scene, the incident commander realized quickly that this was a significant incident and that we needed more resources, so that second alarm was requested through dispatch. Same with the third alarm, fourth alarm, fifth alarm. If we need to activate the ECC through PBAM, that can be done through the dispatcher. Any other additional resources will go through the dispatch.
Public health officials and Portland Fire informed BOEC that an evacuation was necessary.
The decision to evacuate was made about 8:30 and we got the message out by 9, and there were about 3,000 people evacuated from the area. I think it was a mile radius. Multnomah County Emergency Management sheltered 140 people, primarily low-income people who are living this close to some of these industrial hazards. Of the people sheltered, 25% spoke English, 48% spoke Spanish, and then 21% spoke Somali and 6% spoke Mai, which is a Somali dialect. We really try to make sure that we design our programs for all these communities, because underserved communities, low-income communities, people with disabilities are always hurt first and worst in these incidents, and they're who have to access our programs.
Individuals with landlines received a call letting them know they needed to evacuate. Certain residents who have registered their cell phones with that system were also notified. The Cully fire involved a lot of interagency coordination.
During the Killingsworth Scrapyard fire, PPB's role was to assist with evacuations, provide security to prevent looting, and help with the perimeter. Throughout this incident, we worked with our other city public safety bureaus to keep our community members safe. We are proud to collaborate with each of these teams when major incidents occur. We'd also like to highlight our recently completed BOEC Sergeant Liaison program, which we're hoping to continue in the future.
BOEC has recently completed a 5-year strategic plan, and some of the main components of that relate to staffing, meeting national call answering performance standards, and then efficiently and effectively triaging calls for service. We are investigating the implementation of a nurse triage program. That service could free up police and emergency medical services so that they can in turn respond to more urgent calls for service.
Our call volume has been going up significantly. Portland Fire and Rescue responds on close to 90,000 calls a year now. With the new dispatch system, our hope is to continue to look closely at the types of calls that we're responding on and really making it a priority that we're available for the higher acuity calls and being in the right place at the right time with the right type of resource.
To ensure the right resources are reaching the right people, RRVs have been strategically placed to enhance Portland Fire's response reliability. Additionally, RRVs often respond to those call types the Portland Street Response Plan are looking to address. Eliminating an RRV at this time not only decreases Portland Fire's response reliability, but has the potential to hinder the growth of the street response program.
We've been working with the 311 work group with the City of Portland, and we're very interested in seeing that truly become a reality for our community. By having 311 as a easy to remember number for those non-emergency referral type calls through the right methods of public education, the public will know to call 311 as opposed to 911, which then offloads a lot of calls for our dispatchers.
We saw during the Cully Scrapyard fire that it took all of our agencies working together for the emergency response, and that no one agency could do it on their own. Here at PBEM's beautiful Emergency Coordination Center, we have a very seismically resilient facility. It's built to a high seismic standard, it has a backup generator that can run the entire facility for a full week, and it has a dedicated server room that has all the files and applications that we would need to run the city in an emergency. But it's also important that our partner bureaus have their own seismically resilient facilities that they'll be able to work out of after the earthquake.
One challenge that we're facing in Portland Fire and Rescue is looking at our infrastructure, looking at the resiliency of our buildings, of our personnel, of our equipment, and looking forward to see what our greatest needs are. We have really 3 facilities that are in dire need of replacement. Our training facility in Northeast Portland, our apparatus logistics facility in Southeast, and our fire marshal's office also located in Southeast. We would like to work with other bureaus within the city, and specifically we are working with BOAC and PBEM to look at their needs as well. We want to create a resilient system where we do not want to just focus on Portland Fire and Rescue and our needs only. We want to work with the public safety bureaus that we work with so closely and tie our needs into their needs as well.
I'm not a worrier. I couldn't be a worrier and do my job, but I am starting to get concerned with the wildfire risk, with the flood risk, and we need to be working proactively, because depending on where we develop, we really can prevent impacts, and that's really the most important thing to share.
Portland Fire and Rescue is an all hazards response bureau, meaning that we will respond to any incident within the city of Portland. What we train and prepare for is not only the lower acuity type incidents, but also the bigger, higher consequence incidents. So this would be a wildfire in Forest Park, the Cascadia earthquake that would cause mass disruption and damage throughout the city of Portland. Portland Fire trains for this from the bottom on up. So our firefighters, when they first are hired, they are trained to be responders to these bigger scales of incidents. And then as you work up through our command structure, our command staff are also trained in how to manage these incidents. A big part of this is understanding that we are not going to be doing this alone. So this was going to involve coordination with not only BOAC and PBEM, but with all the other bureaus and levels of government within the city of Portland. So when a large incident occurs in Portland, that doesn't mean that other emergencies will stop occurring. There will still be people with medical issues. There will definitely be fires occurring. There will be utility problems, gas leaks, there will be car accidents, and we will still need to respond to those calls. This is where call triaging comes in, and really where our coordination with BOAC is going to be put to the test.
Beautiful center. Is James Wright here?
He's not. He's not here.
He's got
Sorry, he's not
a
here today.
filmmaking career ahead of him. That was an outstanding.
He does excellent work for us, both internally and externally. Very valued employee.
Well, I know we have a slide presentation. I'm not, is it ready to go? All right. All right. Well, good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, and Budget Committee members. I'm Bob Causey, Director of the Bureau of Emergency Communications, and thank you for this opportunity to discuss our budget along with my colleagues from Portland Fire and Rescue and the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management. I'd like to outline BOEC's mission, which is work collaboratively with our community and public safety partners to ensure effective and timely 911 call answering and dispatching. This mission statement was recently developed during our strategic planning process this past year. And it doesn't look like my clicker's working, but the down arrow. There we go, thank you. BOEC fits right in the middle of the key council priorities, ensuring public safety. We're also impacted greatly by our community's homeless and houseless problem, and we also recognize that BOEC is part of our critical infrastructure. This past year, we developed 10 strategic initiatives in a 5-year strategic plan. The first 2 are directly related to our directions to develop. Number 1 is call answering or call performance and staffing, which is characterized as an adequately staffed 911 workforce meeting national call answering standards. And number 2 is consistent, efficient, and effective call triage that outlines professionally triaged and dispatched calls for service. All 10 strategic goals are available for review online, and the link is in the handout. This past year, BOEC has celebrated numerous successes. We completed our 5-year strategic plan, which provides a roadmap for our future success. We also improved call answering performance by reducing the use of the cell phone filter. This filter is designed to reduce the number of accidental 911 calls, or pocket dials, as they're termed. The recording that is heard by a cell phone caller when they reach that filter lasts upwards of 14 seconds. And that has negatively impacted our ability to meet national call answering standards. By leveraging technology within the phone system, we've been able to turn that filter off when calls are not in the queue. Additionally, we're developing a scheduling forecast program to help ensure the best placement of call takers during busier times of the day. We expanded our recruitment efforts, holding up to 3 academies every year, whereas before we were maybe 2 if we were lucky. With 3 academies, a maximum of 12 employees at a time, we've really ramped up our training program. In fact, to the point now, all of our existing FTE positions for dispatch are filled. When I say filled, from a 911 perspective, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're at full staffing. Right now, about 1/3 of our workforce is in training, which means they're not fully certified across the board. We've also improved retention, and of course, as I mentioned, increased staffing, and all of these have positively impacted our call answering performance. That's why I put the arrow in the presentation. One builds on the other and impacts the bottom line, where the successes build on each other. We've also standardized many of our administrative processes, including timekeeping, policy development, and review. Recently, we updated our computer-aided dispatch system and implemented Just Culture. Just Culture is a system designed to deal with mistakes when they happen in a manner that promotes accountability, trust, and helps determine root cause when mistakes are made. It doesn't just blame an employee when a mistake is made. We look at the larger picture and determine if there's a systematic issue at play. On the next slide, we have two graphs that outline the improvements that we've made this past year. Graph number 1 shows a 12% increase in call-taking performance while recognizing the addition of 8 call-taking staff who are certified. Graph number 2 shows the trend related to the national standard, which states that 90% of all 911 calls shall be answered within 10 seconds during the busiest hour of the day. Additionally, all 911 calls should be answered within 20 seconds. As graph 2 demonstrates, we are trending upward. And our low point was in June, right before we turned off the cell phone filter, where we were hitting about 8%. Some of the key challenges and risks that we're facing are continually increasing calls for service, which translates to dispatcher burnout, and it impacts our ability to stay ahead of attrition. With the recent successes in hiring and certifying, it's also become apparent that space and overcrowding is now an issue at BOEC. BOEC is the foundation for creating an equitable first responder system in Portland. 911 service is available to all community members utilizing professional call takers, immediate translation service in any language, text to 911, and TDD, TTY capabilities for the deaf and hard of hearing community. Citywide equity concerns recognize that in 2018, BOEC received 37,753 unwanted person calls for service in all of Multnomah County. Nearly 33,000 were within the city of Portland. In 2017, 52% of all arrests were of persons experiencing homelessness. I believe that Portland street response, as mentioned earlier, will be a driving force in equity by ensuring the right first responder is dispatched to calls. Our directions to develop are tied, as I mentioned earlier, to the first 2 initiatives in our strategic plan, and both are closely tied together. The first direction is related to our call performance and staffing, which is increased staffing to meet the National Emergency Number Association, or NENA as it's termed, performance standards. This package will improve call answering performance and will also help set the stage for Portland street response. If we are to dispatch Portland street response from BOEC, we need about 7 full-time dispatchers in order to accomplish that 24 hours a day. We're also requesting funds for 10 FTE to include those dispatchers, but also recognizing the need for meeting the call answering performance measures. The second request relates to consistent, efficient, and effective call triage, developing a framework for a mental health and nurse triage program, which also helps establish a foundation for Portland street response. This request is for a limited term program manager or in-house management using funds for consulting to help get us on the right path. Thank you for your time. I'd like to pass the microphone to Interim Fire Chief Ryan Gillespie.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning. My name is Ryan Gillespie, Interim Fire Chief for Portland Fire and Rescue. I just want to say a quick thank you to the mayor and the commissioners, city budget advisory members, OEHR, city auditor, Tom, and CAO Tom. I'm sorry. I'll be more formal. I also wanted to thank. Okay, yeah. I just wanted to recognize the Fire Bureau executive team, sworn and non-sworn, many of whom are behind me here today. Local 43, Portland Firefighters Association as well, who are present today, and especially our 6 Budget Advisory Committee meeting members, who we will receive testimony from one of those in a little bit. quick breakdown of our budget. Our total budget is at $127 million. General fund resources within that are $112 million. Important to note, just over 85% of our costs are personnel costs. We do have a program and division breakdown that should be available in your handout there, and I won't go through all of that. Portland Fire and Rescue has a unique strategic plan called the COGGLE, which was implemented by former Fire Chief Myers. Myself and Commissioner Hardesty are committed to carrying that plan forward to completion. The COGGLE is a very positive force for us in organizing our bureau, driving our business, and really planning around common themes. As Chief Myers has presented previously, the COGGLE is a wide-ranging plan with some large, audacious goals, such as 0 fire deaths, and also some very specific internal tasks. In total, there's 248 specific objectives within the COGGLE, and we are on track to complete 87% of those as of today, and we are in the second year of that strategic plan. I can't speak to all of the objectives today, so we're going to focus on 5 specific themes within that COGGLE. Those focus areas are maintaining service levels, equity, fiscal sustainability, firefighter health and wellness, and maintaining critical assets. And our directions to develop are also within those themes. I will address quickly our 1% cut does include frontline services, including an RRV. We considered a variety of efficiencies, program elimination, OT reduction, revenue options, and we did find approximately $450,000 in non-core service related reductions. Really, the elimination of the RRV was the last resort to hit that 1% goal. First theme I will talk about is maintaining service levels. One achievement that we are proud of is that the Bureau's response times have remained steady despite our increasing workload. Some of our best response times are in our most vulnerable areas, including East Portland and the downtown core. We have not asked for additional stations or additional personnel to address this increasing volume, but instead we have found innovative ways to control these climbing calls, and I will speak to those in a later slide. We also continue to look for ways to enhance our service levels within our existing resources. The Blueprint for Success initiative is an example of that, and I will touch on that in the next slide. Our response goal is 5 minutes and 20 seconds at the 90th percentile. We are consistently at 7 minutes and 19 seconds at the 90th percentile. The RRV cut, the impact of this closure will reduce our service levels. We expect those response times to go up, and significant consequences to increased response times are some facts. Brain death due to hypoxia occurs within 7 minutes. Ability to resuscitate from cardiac arrest decreases 10% every minute that advanced life support is delayed, and fires double in size every minute. Our second focus area and theme is equity. So I'm going to go through these in a little different order than how they're listed on the slide. First one I'll talk about is, in addition to our 1% cut that we're taking this year, we have realigned internally to permanently fund our equity manager position. Becky Lamboli was hired late 2018. And we will absorb those costs into our ongoing funding for next year's budget, or for the 19-20 budget. Second one I'm going to talk about is the workplace culture assessment with Portland State. This was done throughout 2018. It consisted of leadership interviews, focus groups, and a bureau-wide survey for all members. We had over 50% response rate to the survey, which we considered quite successful for survey numbers. Along with the workplace assessment, our 5-year equity plan will be built with Portland State, and now that we have Becky on board, she is leading the charge on that to get that completed. Third one I'm going to talk about is the Blueprint for Success program. This was developed under Fire Chief Myers. This is working with Portland State grad students in the urban planning. Really, it's examining sub-communities within Portland and within our fire management areas, or FMAs, taking that information and tailoring the services to the specific needs of the community. Really, this is a great example of results-based accountability when where we're looking at root cause of issues and then developing action plans to address that. And this is not just fire, this is livability issues, public health issues. The fourth item I'm going to talk about is the 3 out of our 4 RRVs in East Portland. The current location of the RRVs, as I said, 3 out of 4 are in East Portland, 1 is in Southeast. These RRVs are helping us manage the low acuity calls that we continue to receive on an increasing basis. It also allows our 4-person companies to be freed up for the higher acuity calls and improving our response times. The RVs have a longer response time, lower acuity calls. They have 20 minutes to respond to these calls, so different standard. And again, it's with our goals of getting the right resource there in the right time. A closure of one of these RRVs will affect communities that are already high on the vulnerability index. So there's a huge equity factor to this budget implication. For example, one of our stations with an RV, 6%, it contains 6% of the population of Portland. 24% of the households within that FMA are below the poverty line. Within this same FMA, 48% of the FMA are people of color, compared to 23% across the city. Fifth item, ADA barriers. We've identified approximately 500 ADA barriers, which we continue to address. We've addressed 47 of those in fiscal year 17-18. And then finally, review and improve firefighter hiring and training. This is truly a full overhaul of our firefighter recruitment, hiring, and training process with the goal of removing barriers for women, for people of color, and for other underrepresented groups within our Bureau. We have a team of our recruiter, our equity manager, working with the division heads and Bureau of Human Resources to revamp our whole structure. Our next theme is fiscal sustainability. Really, we're doing 2 things to address this, demand management and finding efficiencies and cost controlling. I guess that's 3, but finding efficiencies, cost controlling, that's 1. A traditional fire department strategy, as call volume goes up, as population goes up, we come and we ask for more fire stations, we ask for more personnel. We understand, Portland Fire understands that that's not a sustainable model, and so we're not here to ask for that. Some of the things that we are doing Under the demand management, some successes that we've had, we have stopped responding on abdominal calls and back pain calls. AMR is still responding on those, so the citizen still gets a response, but Portland Fire we've deemed that a low acuity call, and so we have stopped responding on those. We've addressed our commercial alarms and have a new policy in place where we won't be responding on as many of those, and we will put more of the onus back on the responsible party. And when that system is reset and it's confirmed, we won't send somebody there. Our chat program, I'd be remiss to not speak about that. That program, and thank you for funding that on an ongoing basis in the last budget cycle. And we have Tremaine with us here today. Really, he was focusing on 3 areas throughout this last year. He continued looking at high utilizers across the system, looking at the houseless population and how we can best address that as the Fire Bureau. And then the third piece is outreach and education. And really, they all overlap. We also...
Excuse me, what does CHAT stand for?
Community Healthcare Assessment Team. Sorry, am I breaking up? That's good. We also, thank you to council, we passed the lift assist ordinance a couple weeks ago. That will be going in effect April 12th, and so that will impact some lower acuity calls, and working with BOEC on the nurse triage in the future. Again, we are looking to manage our demand for calls. Finding efficiencies, we reopened Station 23 with existing resources. We are implementing new software across our divisions to make us more efficient. We are controlling overtime, as you see on the slide. Overtime has remained consistent over the last few years, and that's done by managing our traveler pool and looking at our hiring projections and maintaining the appropriate number of personnel as folks retire. And that's the balance, is the traveling pool and the overtime. We secured a grant last year, Assistance to Firefighter grant, for our SCBAs, and we have also just submitted a grant with Parks for wildland interface funds at Forest Park. We've installed smart thermostats in our stations. As you know, we're staffed 24/7, which has unique utility needs for our employees. So by installing the smart thermostats, we are addressing some of those utility budget implications. We will move our RRVs to meet demands, so they may be in one station today. In a few months, depending on the needs, depending on the demands of the community, we will move those around to address those needs. And finally, under fiscal sustainability, we also realigned within the Bureau to create a professional standards chief. This was in response to the findings from our workplace assessment, and it's relating to our organizational culture and accountability, and we were able to staff that position within our existing structure. Focus area 4, firefighter health and wellness. Health and wellness of our firefighters is an ongoing concern for the Bureau. Studies have shown that nationally, firefighters have higher risk for cardiac issues, cancer risk, PTSD, and depression. Recently, when we conducted that workplace assessment, major finding was a concern from our members about the high stress environment, which leads to mental health degradation of our employees. I will note the number 3 causes of firefighter death are cancer, suicide, and cardiac events. A survey by the Journal of Emergency Medical Services noted that suicide contemplation by EMS providers is 37%, which was staggering when I heard that, and that's compared to the CDC national average of 3.7%. We have done, I feel, a good job of reducing firefighter injuries. So in the slide as well, you'll see the hours lost to on-duty injury is going down, but we do have a trend of increasing sick leave. This could be tied to fatigue, stress, or the mental health issues that I'm speaking of. Also linked to fiscal sustainability with these health issues is cost to the city. So when we have people out on injury, we backfill those positions to maintain our minimum staffing level. In fiscal year 17-18, we were at $770,000 in overtime to backfill those positions. This theme and this goal is directly tied to our direction to develop for a health and wellness coordinator for the Fire Bureau. The last theme I will address here is maintaining critical assets. A major challenge for Portland Fire and Rescue is addressing future costs associated with personal protective equipment and facilities. While we're discussing our needs for this upcoming fiscal year, we also need to talk about our future needs. We successfully set aside funds earlier in the decade for apparatus replacement, and we were fortunate to receive general fund and grant funds for the replacement of our SCBAs. We recognize the need to set aside funds for future replacements. We do not want to find ourselves in a similar situation as we did last year, asking for a large sum of money to replace equipment that we know has a lifespan and that we know will need to be replaced. As the video showed as well, we have a significant need for one-time resources for our logistics, prevention, and training facility. With our directions to develop under this theme, reserve funds for our PPE replacement, personal protective equipment replacement, turnouts, SCBA, and equipment. We are asking for this so that we can build that reserve fund and again, not run into that situation from last year. As well, a direction to develop is for a boathouse for Fireboat 17. Station 17 is located on Hayden Island. Fireboat 17 is a $2.7 million fireboat which protects the Columbia River. This boat is currently it does not have a boathouse and is exposed to the weather. We are seeing increased maintenance costs for that compared to our other fireboat 21, which is located on the Willamette River. And we also have close to $300,000 of removable equipment on that fireboat and are concerned with the security of that equipment. This next slide is a heat map to show the impact of our RRV program. Again, the intent of the RRV program is to get the right resources to the right place at the right time. This allows our four-person companies to be available for higher acuity or more serious calls. As we look forward and how best to serve all of our community, including our underserved populations, the RRV program is critical. We are committed to exploring other service models, and we did speak a little bit earlier about the Cahoots model in Eugene, the Portland Street Response, which Street Roots had a story about just a couple weeks ago. We are absolutely committed to looking at that, and these resources, the RRV resources, we really see as the key to implementing a new program. On this final slide, I will summarize our directions to develop, and it also shows how they fall under our 5 themes that I talked about today. Restoration of the RRV. This is so we can continue to provide appropriate level of service to historically underserved populations, specifically in East Portland. Also so that we can pursue innovative response models addressing social and medical needs during our houseless emergency state, which the city of Portland is in. Secondly, health and wellness coordinator in response to the workplace assessment and the needs of our employees. This position is to provide for health and wellness needs of our workforce as our cancer rates and mental health issues continue to rise. Thirdly, equipment replacement reserves. Again, we do not want to run into the same issue as last year. We do not want to pass costs of doing business onto future generations, and we want to address this through a reserve fund. And then finally, our boathouse for Fireboat 17. It's important to maintain this critical asset on the Columbia River to manage the maintenance costs and provide security for that fireboat. Thank you. And I would like to introduce one of our Budget Advisory Committee members, Bobby Regan, who will give a short testimony.
Hi, thank you all.
Morning.
I thought I was going at the end rather than right now, so this is very exciting. Mayor Wheeler, Fire Commissioner Hardesty, Commissioners Fish, Fritz, and Udeli, Auditor Caballero, and Community Budget Advisors. I'm Bobby Regan, a former longtime member of the Portland School Board and a member of the Fire Bureau's Budget Advisory Committee for the past 5 years. I also served on the hiring committee that brought former Fire Chief Mike Myers to Portland. Our advisory committee thanks Chief Myers and former Fire Commissioner Dan Saltzman for their service, and we look forward to working closely with Interim Fire Chief Ryan Gillespie and new Fire Commissioner Joanne Hardesty. Thanks to one-time funding you approved last year, we have a new member on the Fire Bureau's management team this budget cycle, Becky Lamboli, the Bureau's equity manager. And in our first meeting, we observed that our advisory committee included no community members of color. That changed by our next meeting, when we were joined by Promise King, a prominent and compassionate member of the community. Having their voices in our discussions has made a tangible and positive difference. As community members, our first concern when it comes to the Fire Bureau is response time. The Fire Bureau's response time is still currently 2 minutes longer on average than the national goal. We're at 7 minutes and 19 seconds when the goal is 5 minutes and 20 seconds. To put that in perspective, again, brain death from lack of oxygen begins at about 7 minutes. Fires double in size every minute, and the ability to resuscitate a person after cardiac arrest decreases 10% with every passing minute. At the same time, Portland's population is growing, housing density is increasing, traffic congestion is worsening, the threat of wildfires is real, a major earthquake is in our future, and we're experiencing an increase in issues surrounding our city's vulnerable homeless population where firefighters are often first responders. It is with this background that the city asked the Fire Bureau to come up with a 1% budget cut. While the Budget Advisory Committee supports some of the Bureau's recommendations, we could not support the largest line item the Bureau management was forced to put on the table, the elimination of one rapid response vehicle, or RRV, along with the 6 firefighter positions it takes to operate this service 24/7. RRVs allow for a 2-person response to lower acuity calls, freeing up 4-person engines for higher level calls. The Bureau currently has 4 RRVs serving some of the city's most diverse and vulnerable neighborhoods. 3 are in East Portland, 1 is in Southeast, none are on the West Side. As such, we view this proposed cut as one that will betray the city's equity vision and weaken the department's response times even further. We are grateful to Commissioner Hardesty for her recommendation to restore this RRV, and we ask for your support. In addition, for 5 years, Budget Advisory Committee members have heard of higher than necessary costs for the Bureau due to the requirement to use in-house city bureaus for services such as technology and maintenance. This year, we ask you to consider an independent audit of such services to take a deeper dive look at this reality, and we thank you for your consideration. And now I want to end my remarks where we started, talking about equity. For years, the Bureau has wanted to diversify its frontline staff, adding more women and people of color. With the passage of statewide Measure 98 2 years ago, designed to increase high school graduation rates, we now have 5 school districts in the city of Portland that are adding career technical education opportunities to expose students to careers they may not have otherwise considered. I ask Mayor Wheeler, as our police commissioner, and each of you to consider how we might diversify our frontline public safety ranks in Portland by working directly with Portland school districts to develop and offer a public safety career technical education curriculum in some of our most diverse high schools. Imagine a world where our police and fire bureaus are 50% women, 30% people of color, and 15% bilingual, more closely reflecting Portland's overall population. Our workforce of tomorrow is in our diverse high schools today. We encourage the city to partner with one or more of our Portland school districts to develop and invest in our public safety workforce of tomorrow. That's an equity goal we can all embrace. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Bobby, for your testimony. We would love to take any questions you have at the end of the presentation, but first I'd like to introduce PBAM Interim Director Courtney Patterson.
Morning.
Good morning, Council, Madam Auditor, fellow directors, and the Community Budget Advisory Committee. Before I start, I just wanted to thank Council for the support that PBAM has gotten in its budget for the past fiscal years and for many of our programs. And I'd like to stress, with a $3.6 million budget, we believe that Portland gets an incredibly valuable program and also the best emergency management program in the state. PBAM has 4 strategic goals: our response and recovery plans, advancing our emergency coordination center, that's the beautiful building that you saw in the video, fostering connected and resilient neighborhoods, and then workplace innovation and excellence. For our successes, I wanted to highlight how PBAM centers our programs on historically underserved communities. People with disabilities, people who are over 65, people of color, low-income communities, and low English proficiency individuals all experience disasters first and worst. There's a lot of reasons for this, but one is just that if you have resources, you're not going to live in an industrial area like we saw with the Cully Scrapyard fire. I'd also like everyone to think about if there was a fire at their house or some other minor disaster, where you would go and what you would do. And I don't think anyone in this room would be sleeping in a high school gymnasium on a cot with 200 other people. So middle-class people will tend to have their own vehicle, their own resources, they'll have money for a hotel for a night. So it's really important to us at PBAM that we're designing our programs for the people who are going to use them. This was also in the video, but I just wanted to stress again the demographics of the population that we needed to serve in this incident and that we expect that will serve in any incident. Between 2010 and 2018, there was likely more immigration into the Cully neighborhood, so this isn't a kind of a one-for-one comparison, but I think it does illustrate the point. And also, if the group could just think about, imagine that you were the preschool teacher at Sacagawea Head Start, and you had 23 and 4-year-olds, and over half are speaking either Somali or Spanish. Like, how would you reassure those kids, and how would you how can you even address kind of these issues that we see? So it's definitely a challenge for us to get emergency messages, in English, in Spanish, but especially to a Somali-speaking community that, from what we found after this incident, most did not speak. They couldn't read Somali. They could only speak it. After the Cully Scrapyard fire, one really great success that we had after this incident was council has supported our neighborhood emergency team program, and this is a program that has had a lot of success. We have over 1,700 volunteers, and with this many volunteers, we have coverage around most of the city. So in Cully, we did have a very active Portland neighborhood emergency team volunteer who contacted us and said, "Hey, we're having community meetings. You should come." We attended 2 listening sessions. The first one, it was clear that there were a lot of questions for police and fire. So for the second session, Chief Outlaw attended, and definitely appreciate that. And also a senior individual from the Fire Bureau attended and was able to address the community's concerns that they had after that incident. We also brought a Lisa's class to the neighborhood. We see this, that after emergency incidents, the community becomes interested in our programs, and so they asked us for a preparedness training, and we brought a Lisa's class, which is a culturally specific preparedness class. It's a federal program, but it is all in Spanish. Listos is ready in Spanish. And that Portland Net is also on our budget advisory committee. And also about 3 weeks ago, I advocated for some state legislation that would close some loopholes related to scrapyards and could help prevent another fire like this from happening in the city. Transitioning to some key challenges and risks that the Bureau is facing, I mentioned that we've received additional staff in our neighborhood emergency team and our other community programs. And between that work and the unreinforced masonry upgrade, some policy work that we're doing, that has taken away essentially one staff person who was previously dedicated to emergency response planning. And the percentage of plans that we have up to date has been decreasing as we've worked on these other council priorities. When I talk about emergency plans, I wanted to stress, what does an emergency plan mean, or what are we planning for? And really, we are planning for almost every vital service that the community will need after an emergency. So food and water distribution, firefighting, emergency medical services, shelter, roads and bridges, economic redevelopment, safety inspections of buildings so they can be re-entered. But ultimately, it's really ensuring that we have the security, stability, and democracy, that we'll have that all the way through, from when an emergency happens till we're back up and functioning regularly. Another key challenge and risk that we have, and I feel very grateful that I work in a jurisdiction where I can just say that climate change exists, and it's a reality that we're working with. So these are the billion-dollar disasters that occurred in the U.S. in 2017. There were 16 of them. In the previous 10 years, the average was about $5 billion disasters a year. And looking at Hurricane Harvey, we're looking at $198 billion was the cost for that disaster. Since 2015, there have been 2 1,000-year floods in the U.S., as in Louisiana and in Texas, and most of our infrastructure is built with a recognition of a 100-year flood, and so and we've had 2 of these 1,000-year floods in the last few years. This graphic came out about 2 weeks ago from NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, and basically it's just showing the percent of the U.S. that is at risk from floods, and then it's definitely concerning, and it's just a very short amount of time before it's going to be here in Portland. It could be the Willamette or the Columbia. I just want to make sure that I link how climate change affects all these disasters. So, we know that the temperature is getting hotter generally across the U.S., and this can cause droughts. Droughts have follow-on disasters that can come from it. So wildfire, I think, is pretty intuitive, that wildfires are more likely, the forest dries out, and wildfires are more likely after an area has experienced drought. but it also can cause more flooding because the ground will dry up, and then when it rains, the ground is not able to absorb the water, and it can cause flooding as well. So talking specifically about Portland and the wildfire risks that we do have, there is some evidence that the amount of water in especially Forest Park is less than it was even a few years ago. And so these are the type of hazards and risks that we would like to address. It is definitely not all bad news. There are hundreds of different policies that the city could put into place that would decrease the amount of risk that we have. Just on wildfire, there's, we could have a requirement to have fire-resistant roofing materials. There's something called Firewise Communities, which is basically public education around wildfire risk. And that's something that we could look at to do more of, especially around Forest Park. The defensible space is where you kind of clear brush from around your house and create a defensible space around your home from the woodland environment. We could just on a basic level, transitioning to what we can do for earthquake risk, learn the seismic risks of the buildings where city employees work, and start slowly over time raising the seismic standards initially for city-owned buildings, and then continuing for the whole city broadly. And parklands can also be designed for water storage. So PBIM had 2 directives to develop related to these key challenges and risk. And I want to stress that we're not asking for, for FTE. What we really wanted to do is, with these directives to develop, was highlight that some of that planning has been pushed off to a longer timeline because of the unreinforced masonry work and the work we're doing with community programs. And then also that we want to be working on these policy options. We see that they're available. We want to be working on that, but don't currently have the staff to be doing it. And an ad for either of these programs will help the other, because at this point we have one person who's trying to do both, and we're not able to get the bandwidth on them. I would like to thank you on behalf of BOAC, Fire, and PBIM. We hope that you've enjoyed this look at how our bureaus have to work together day to day and in a big emergency, and we're open for questions.
Well, thanks for the presentation. I really like how you've melded the 3 bureaus together, and admire your collaborative approach. I don't have a lot of questions. I am curious with BOAC, how are you addressing employee burnout? Because I can only imagine how stressful that job is, and I know that there's challenges attracting and retaining workers.
Yeah, employee morale in the 911 world is challenging, certainly, to deal with. At this point in time, morale is actually pretty good. There's been enough momentum moving forward. A lot of our employees are feeling very encouraged, but that doesn't diminish a lot of the issues that they're facing. In the 911 world, our call takers are talking to people on the worst day of their lives. Every day, day in and day out. It doesn't change. And that can take its toll on employees. We have a number of programs in-house. We have employee recognition. In fact, our upcoming award ceremony, all of you were invited for it. We'd love to have you attend. That's coming up later this month. We also have a peer team that reaches out to employees when they've dealt with an unusually traumatic call. And in that case, one of the peer team members, who's a dispatcher, will pull that employee off the floor, talk them through it, basically do a mini debrief for critical incident stress management, and make a determination if they're really able to continue work that day. We all have bad days, and you put it in perspective. They're talking to people all the time with horrible stories. And because of the resiliency that most dispatchers have, they're able to cope with that in the moment. But there are those times where they need the time away. And in those circumstances, they're actually given the rest of the day off.
Thank you.
I also want to just say it's been enormously helpful to me to see how the three bureaus interact, so I compliment the Commissioner in charge for presenting holistically this story. I want to drill down on the 1%, though, with Interim Chief Gillespie. So you have to show a 1% cut. 1% in your budget amounts to how much money?
1.2 million.
Okay. And I think you're hearing from the Budget Advisory Committee, probably from others, that the RRV is an unlikely candidate for that 1%. So I just want to be clear, what's your backup plan? What's your alternative cut if the RRV is not accepted by the mayor?
Well, we have 450,000 approximately that is non-service related. Our backup plan is that the RRV will be cut and we will have to redeploy our resources. So our on-duty service level will decrease. We don't have a backup plan as far as what else would we cut if it's not approved. Those were evaluated throughout the budget process from our staff and then through the Budget Advisory Committee to determine if there was alternatives to the RRV cut. So really the plan B or the consequence is that our service delivery to the community will be less than what we currently are doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just sort of predicting the mayor's got a tough set of choices here, and to offer up a 1% that your Budget Advisory Committee does not support, and then to have that as an ad package puts the mayor in the position then of finding 1% on his own. And I would strongly urge you to come back with an alternative 1% cut that doesn't include the RRV, so that the council and the Citizen Budget Committee and others can evaluate the impact on the organization.
Certainly, I'll work with the team to see if we can identify something else. I know that the rocks were overturned and dug through to try to find that in the first place, so we didn't have to bring a service cut to the council, but that's not to say we can't look again.
So I'd like to support what Commissioner Fish just said, and just to remind you what the mayor's direction was for the 1% budget cut, which was through realignment, smart use of technology, reduction of overhead, or other means that do not impact frontline service delivery to the public. And you mentioned a couple of things that seem questionable. Well, I was just looking at your budget dashboard, and it looks like you've got 13 million or so in exterior materials and services and internal materials and services. So I would wonder why some of the more of the cut couldn't come from there. I remember, you alluded to the fact that we did add funding for the community health assessment team. That to me is a nice to have, not a must have, whereas the RRVs are a must-have. And when you look at the budget office's analysis of how many calls are diverted, the chat is about 500 calls per year, and the RVs are 5,422. So in terms of the reduction in service level, it seems like cutting the chat program would be better than cutting the RRVs. You mentioned that you realigned your internal budgets at a professional standards chief. Again, let's look at frontline services. And then I do have a question about stopping responding to low acuity. You said not responding to back pain and abdominal pain.
Yeah.
There's multiple other things that you're still responding to, that the ambulances could respond to it, and that are not life-threatening, like cardiac arrest and traumatic injuries, etc. So what's the status of that?
So that is highly dependent on our dispatch system. And so we're working with BOEC to address that. The reason that the abdominal calls and the back pain calls were identified for us to not respond to was because of the high percentage of those that really were not acute calls. When we look at some of our other calls, we have a sick type code, SK3, that we'll respond on. Because of how the system is built together, I don't know the percentages, but we will go on those and they will end up being a cardiac arrest. So that's how we evaluate the calls, and those errors in, I don't even know if error is the right word, but the misdispatched call is attributable to a number of reasons, language, confusion. So that's why we will continue to look at our lower acuity calls to determine if we need to go or not, but we have to balance that with the potential that call is in fact a life-threatening emergency.
Yeah, I see the medical director from Multnomah County here, right? I'm sorry, I'm confusing with somebody else. So I do have a question about for both of you about this nurse triage concept. First of all, for BOEC, for emergency communications, why do you need more dispatchers for the street response?
Yeah, in order to provide 24-hour dispatch for an alternate concept, that would require standing up another net in our dispatch center. Wow. And to staff that net, right now all of our dispatchers are busy with everything else that they're covering, so adding this to an existing net would be problematic. So what we're looking at doing is 7 FTE would allow us to staff that net 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And you mentioned that you have space needs, space planning challenges.
Right.
Where would you accommodate that additional staff?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've looked at our facility now. We have times where, because we have so many trainees that are sitting with coaches, we're quickly running out of space. Oftentimes we'll see a call taker having to sit either in the supervisor pod with the supervisors taking calls, or they'll be in the sim room, which is across the hall and really not supervised, if you will. There's 10 positions in there that are really set aside for training and for setting up simulation training for dispatchers as they're getting near to the end of their certification. And that room is capable of handling calls for service, but again, you have one person or two people working over there by themselves, that can be problematic. What I'm looking at in terms of our space considerations at BOEC is realizing that we have a seismically stable structure that just needs to be expanded. And I think we have the space, but that would require moving the dispatch floor out into the existing hallway and training space, having our training department and administrative offices perhaps move downstairs. But right now downstairs is currently being used by BTS. So we don't want to kick out our BTS partners. They need a place to go. So
we've learned that the logistics tend to cost a lot of money. So I think that it's beyond just the asking for the positions. But then finally, with the proposal to add nurse dispatchers, why would you not be doing what we did in between 9 and 12 in assigning some of the mental health calls to the Multnomah County Triage Crisis Center? Why would you not be using more coordinated care organizations and other healthcare networks who already have 24/7 nurse call-in centers? Why would you not just be transferring the calls?
Yeah, we transfer a lot of calls already. But when you look at the number of calls that we receive that require other types of response, not just mental health response, that's kind of where the conversation about Portland Street Response comes in.
But why would you not, just like we did for mental health, why would you not transfer this to the existing healthcare providers? Why do you need people in BOEC?
They don't necessarily need to be in BOEC. They can be housed elsewhere, but we have to have the interface and the connection in place so that we can transfer that caller. In the simplistic world, we would have perhaps a nurse triage position within BOEC. That position doesn't have to be housed in our facility.
Perhaps I'll let somebody else have a turn. Perhaps you could get back, we could have a further conversation, because I'm not understanding why they have to be employed by the city rather than by the healthcare providers and transferring the call to existing 24/7 nurse hotlines.
Yeah, and as we're looking at developing the framework, those are the questions we're hoping to be able to answer over the next year and a half before that program can be implemented.
Commissioner, I think one of the things that we didn't mention today because of the limited time is that we're actually updating how the 911 call operator system would operate. It's called the medically, the medical priority dispatch system. And once that system is updated, then we will have to retrain all the 911 call center employees to actually be able to use that system. And what that system will do is give us a much clearer picture of who is appropriate for the first responder. We're just starting conversations with Multnomah County, so no decisions have been made yet. The priority is getting this 911, this new system in place with the 911 call center so that we can better deploy folks as first responders, but we're still starting to have the conversation with the county chair and Commissioner Sharon Marin and with other outside medical providers, because that's what I say. We have 24 hours, 7 days a week, nurse triages at every HMO in the Portland metro area, and why wouldn't we just create a bigger partnership to make that happen? And so I don't want you to think that anything is like, other than this update to the 911 system, nothing else is in stone yet. And we're really open to creative ideas because we have to work with the mayor and other people to figure out.
You get to work with the mayor.
I have the pleasure of working with the mayor and other people to actually figure out how do we build a system that makes sense.
Commissioner Fritz, can I address your concern about the RV versus the chat program? I didn't address that one. When we're looking at FTEs, it's not a apple for apple, so that would be 1 versus 6 FTEs for an RV to reach the budget ask. My big concern with dropping the chat program and not funding that is the work that's being done through that program now. So prior to last year, it really was focused on high utilizers only, system-wide, repetitive users of 911. Since the funding last year, that position has grown into so much more, and it's really our one proactive position within the Bureau that's addressing the houseless issue and how the Fire Bureau can address that with what we have. So they're really a program manager and boots on the ground addressing some of those issues.
Thank you. And I voted to start the program, so I'm fond of that. I think it reflects on Commissioner Fisher's comment. If we're not going to cut the RVs, then it would be helpful if you could identify those additional savings somewhere else. Otherwise, we're going to be forced to be making decisions about stuff that we don't know as much as you.
Absolutely, I understand. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that position really has grown into a different mission and is highly valuable to PF&R.
Could I just ask a clarifying question? I don't necessarily need the answer now. But first of all, let me say I'm very appreciative of the collaborative approach, and all of our public safety bureaus have a vested interest in seeing parts of this be funded in each of the bureaus. So I appreciate the 3 bureaus that have presented today, and Chief Outlaw, I appreciate your being engaged in this as well. I need clarity on what we believe we can actually accomplish here in year 1 around the street response. And I need to know which specific program offers must be funded in order to help it be successful in year 1. I also need a 5-year plan. I need to know, what does the pilot look like? How much does it cost? Who is involved? Who does what? And what's the 5-year plan? Because I'm feeling conflicting information. I'm getting dozens of emails from people saying, all I have to do is fund the $182,000 package and we're good to go. And I know that's not the case, right? Because we also have to fund, as you say, a $2.8 million package around the call center. I'm hearing you, Chief, say that the RRV is a critical part of this response. And the question I would ask is, what about Old Town Chinatown, for example? There is no RRV, and there's never been an RRV assigned to the west side of the river. So does that leave a gap? I have a question with regard to Well, at any rate, so if you could help me gain clarity in relatively quick order on what is the scaled appropriate first-year ask? Because I think we all agree that we need to act with a sense of urgency around making sure that the appropriate individuals are actually deployed. And Chief Outlaw, who's sitting behind you, has said many, many times that deploying police officers is often not the right answer. And I'm hearing you say, Chief, sometimes deploying the Fire Bureau is not the right answer.
Correct.
And a legitimate question has been raised about what is the role of our partners? What do we need to be working with Multnomah County, the County Health Department, and other agencies? I think we're all in alignment on that. So I just need to know the path forward because we do have tough cuts. I had a couple of questions that may actually be to the Budget Bureau rather than, well, actually, I'll ask you sort of the idiot question du jour. You have a fireboat. It's an expensive asset. It says here in the narrative that it's deteriorating due to the weather. In the near term, couldn't we just rent a boathouse until we have a more permanent capital construction solution?
I'm going to ask Jay Guo, our business manager, to come up to address that.
I mean, I don't know. This is why I don't own a boat. I don't want to have to worry about this.
My name is Jay Guo, Senior Business Operation Manager for Fire Bureau. The quick answer is I don't know yet. So we did in the past explore like used boathouse, and this boat, our new boat is pretty big. So in the past we had those used boathouse not big enough.
How big is the boat?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know.
Big. It's big. It's the big fire boat. Okay.
42?
Got it.
42 feet.
42 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and it has to be deployed on Hayden Island. Did I hear that correctly? That's the
It
appropriate
protects the
deployment.
Columbia River, so it's on the channel side of Hayden Island.
Okay, so if there's anybody out there who has a boathouse in the Hayden Island vicinity that's 42 feet long, we want to hear from you in the near term. That's helpful. I was confused by the analysis from CBO. And so maybe, Jessica, you could help me understand this. Well, let's start with the self-contained breathing apparatus. And I really appreciate the acknowledgement and the attempt to be proactive in terms of establishing reserve accounts for replacement. CBO did not recommend the analysis around the SCBAs. Could you, and I want to find the exact line because I don't want to waste your time if I can find it.
I believe it's page 10 and 11.
Yeah, thank you. So due to limited ongoing general fund resources, you recommend against it, but then you say, we recommend the Fire Bureau sequester its current SCBA funding surplus and retain and allocate its annual general fund discretionary underspending into an equipment replacement reserve sub-fund to build a more stable ongoing replacement reserve. Can you explain to me what that means so I understand
Yes, I
what
can.
your recommendation is?
Certainly. Robert Cheney, Budget Office. So Fire, as you remember, received general fund funding last year to replace the SCBA's. After that happened, they also received a grant from FEMA.
Okay,
they
so
currently
the ongoing is, or the carryover is the grant which they've already received from FEMA.
Correct, yeah. So they're undergoing a solicitation of the SCBA equipment right now. We don't know what the final cost will be, but we know that they likely have more funding for it than it costs. So CBO has said instead of recommending a $300,000 ongoing appropriation from the general fund, they just seed a capital reserve fund with the difference in funding that they got.
How do you respond to that?
I think that is an appropriate way to start. If we can carry over those funds, start that reserve fund, that would, depending on the cost of the SCBA's, that would buy us a couple years before we would need to start paying into that reserve fund consistently.
Okay, and the FTE Health and Wellness Coordinator, you made a strong case for that. You made a compelling case. CBO says, well, first of all, they agree. They say that there's a clear need and a financial benefit for additional mental health and physical health for firefighters. They go on to say, because of the potential of a position like this to create savings related to injury and sick leave, CBO recommends the Bureau pilot the position with an internal realignment or through carryover or of anticipated underspending and hire a limited-term employee to determine the effectiveness of the program. How do you respond to that idea of a pilot?
We are in the process right now of hiring somebody for that position. We've gone through the recruitment process and individuals being identified, and we are going to have them start here within the next month or so. That temporary funding is only through this fiscal year, though. Last year, we were able to absorb our equity manager position into our budget. Moving forward with the health and wellness position and working with Jay, we don't feel that we can absorb that position without additional funding to support that. So we are going to do it on a short-term basis, but there's really, we're talking a couple months until the new fiscal year starts.
Okay, and you have a whole list of capital issues that you had recommended funding, and I would like to know, just offline, it doesn't have to be today, I'd like to see the prioritization of those capital requests. I'd at least like to start working through the list and maybe create a longer-term plan to address all of those issues.
Certainly.
Commissioner Hardesty noted to me that there are actually facilities we have where people are going outside and using porta potties, and that doesn't seem like a particularly good solution.
Absolutely. So we have some, I guess, some smaller needs as far as roof replacements, replacing a boathouse, replacing a boathouse door, some smaller ones, and then we've got some big needs. So that was what we referred to in the video, our logistics facility, our fire marshal's office, and our training facility, where we're not talking about just putting a new roof on. That is a rebuild of those entire facilities. So we are going to be working to evaluate a GEO bond potential to support the financing for those bigger projects, but we can absolutely look at these, the smaller ones too, and make sure that you have the priority from us.
Great, I appreciate that. That's my questions for you. Thank you, and I appreciate your service. You've done a really great job stepping into the breach, and I just want to acknowledge that. Director Kazi, you too, thank you for your leadership and your tremendous efforts to improve the call time. And I particularly want to acknowledge your idea around taking off the cell filter at certain days. I thought that was an incredibly innovative and creative and apparently very effective part of the solution so thank you for that. As we think about this street response question, and you've asked for increased staffing to meet the NENA performance standards, another conversation we've had separately in this chamber is around the 311 system, and that came up again today, and that's sort of the big vision around reducing your call volume and also connecting the right people to the right dispatch.
Right.
How does what you're requesting around the NENA performance standards, the FTE, how does that work towards the 311 goal, or is that separate from the 311 goal? How do we begin the process of significantly moving towards 311? And I'll put my cards on the table. We've been putting it on life support for years, and I need to know, are we serious about this, and are we going to do it, or aren't we serious, and let's stop wasting money if we're not?
I'd really like to see 311 be a reality. The numbers that we're needing, if nothing changes, for us to meet the national performance standard is 24 more FTE. That's if nothing changes. So my strategic plan is developed in such a way that there's an incremental ask. This year was the big ask of 10 FTE, and then looking at upcoming years, 5 additional until we're able to meet that. Now, if the world changes and we have 311 as a reality and it's impacting our call volume, as I hope it will, There's a lot to take into account here because we have to have the right public education campaign. So callers know when they should call 911, when they should call 311. We're already working with information and referral to try to figure out how we might be able to leverage that service more readily. The problem is, a lot of it is tied to public education.
So, but if we, and I think you understand our budget situation, so the likelihood of that full request being funded is approximately zero.
Right.
But I think we're committed towards moving towards that goal. I just want to make sure I understand, are those investments in direct alignment with a 311 system, or do we have to talk about that completely separately after you have 24 more dispatchers?
No, if 311 is able to be up and running, I don't think that we'll need 24 more dispatchers.
Okay, great. Excellent presentations today. I appreciate it, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Commissioner.
I had a couple of questions. Thank you so much for your presentations, and I especially appreciated your listing some of your strategic goals and links to your strategic plans. That's very helpful to sort of situate your budget in a larger context. And I also really wanted to especially appreciate Director Patterson's specific mention of advocacy for more systemic solutions. It does feel like a lot of emergency management is preventing emergency. So I appreciate that. And it called to question for me sort of what the process is for you around identifying those issues for larger state advocacy and how you're filtering those to the city's larger legislative agenda.
Yeah, we had one bill that came out of the unreinforced masonry works. We identified that we needed to submit a bill to the state for their consideration about a seismic grant program for nonprofits. And so we'll generally do some work at the city level before recommending bills, but it's been very interesting at the state legislature this year. There has been probably a threefold increase in the number of bills that are directly related to resilience or emergency management that have been presented. So we work closely with government relations to try to identify those bills and comment or work on them as we can. And I think now that we know that it's happened this year, that there's been so many more, I think we'll be better prepared next year. There are some that are not continuing in the state legislature this year that I'd like to include on the city's priorities for next year.
You also referenced a few times the unreinforced masonry work. Is there a description somewhere of the focus and goals of that work and sort of its scope within the city?
Absolutely. I can send you a link.
Thank you. Some other questions that I had were, I guess, an observation. In most of the previous presentations we've seen, we've also gotten demographic breakdowns of your employees, which are absent from today's presentation, and I'd love to see those. I had a couple of specific questions for the Fire Bureau. They're reflecting questions you've already heard, I think, from Commissioner Fish and Fritz at this point about the suggested cut of the RRV. And you specifically, I think, noted that this has disparate equity impacts. And I believe, in addition to the criterion that Commissioner Fritz shared, that we were supposed to be hearing potential cuts that did not have disparate equity impacts. So as you're reflecting next on what the cuts would be in place of this, I would love to have more information about the impacts to marginalized communities, because it seems like this, for a variety of reasons that folks have noted, is a no-go, including that it has a disparate impact on already highly susceptible populations.
Absolutely, yeah. In our frontline services, the underserved populations, that is typically where our calls are most of the time. So for any frontline service cut for us is going to have a disparate impact on our community.
Mm-hmm. So just a note, when we hear what the potential replacements for that cut will be, I'd love to be able to understand
Absolutely.
Those impacts and which communities will be impacted by those cuts.
Sure.
The next thing was you talked about a workplace culture assessment, and I wonder, because we didn't have any data about the demographics of the workforce generally. It would also be nice to have information about who responded to that assessment.
Sure.
And what the kind of demographics of the folks who responded to that survey were. And generally, kind of a little bit more of a summary about what was learned from that survey and whether there were themes sort of by demographic breakdown among what folks were reporting were their experiences
Yeah,
in that
absolutely.
workplace.
We can send the link to the survey results.
That'd be great, thank
the,
you.
The assessment results.
And then the last thing I think is you referenced high utilizers. And it feels like it's part of this larger conversation about Portland's street response, and I'm assuming that there's some coordination going on there about who's getting which kinds of calls, but who's being dispatched to address different kinds of calls.
Right.
Is that true for this high utilizer population, that there's some back-end coordination going on between your bureaus to address the underlying issues that those folks are facing?
Right. So when we talk about high utilizers, that's across the socioeconomic scale. So we have people that live that are middle class, that are upper class, that are high utilizers, and the program originally was addressing everybody. We also have the lower socioeconomic group and the houseless population, which are high utilizers as well. The resource needs for both are distinctly different. And so that is what our CHAP program is focusing on now, is not just the fact that somebody's a high utilizer, but like you said, what are the core reasons for that, and how can we address that? So I think you had a second part, which
No, I just was wanting to find out if that's connected to Director Cozy's presentation about wanting to make sure that the right responders are getting the right calls.
Right.
And how you're folding high utilizer issues into that larger plan about who's getting which respondent.
Right. So the Portland Street Response, that's what Tremaine and his CHAP position has been really focused on how can we implement that with the resources that we have in the Fire Bureau. We definitely have some challenges to that and some barriers. And this answers the mayor's question a little bit too, as far as can we implement this next week? We have some challenge. We have some training issues for our personnel. We have labor management implications where we would be looking at our scope of work and the services that we would be providing to the community. So we would want to make sure that we're on the same page with that as well. We absolutely understand and see from the front lines what a lot of the needs of the community are. We're in a great position geographically to address a lot of those needs, but like the police too, we're not necessarily trained to or have all the tools to address those needs. So while we have the geographics, potentially some of the infrastructure to do that, there are some pieces that will need to be put in place before we can roll right into it.
And I'd also just like to add that fire doesn't have a choice. When they get a call from 911, they go, right? And today, we are not in a position to be able to triage those calls as those calls come in. There's some infrastructure that must be improved before any new program actually rolls out. And so that's why one of the directives to develop is really around having someone planning. What does that look like, right? Because my folks are really, they're busy. They're doing a lot of stuff. They've got a lot of moving parts. And they can't think through the program while they're actually updating the 911 call center and actually trying to bring on more employees at the same time. So I think that, and we don't want to get too far ahead of the rest of the city council because we need to bring everybody along. And so, this is a balancing act between having a vision that we're moving forward and then having the resources to actually start making that vision a reality.
I have a couple more questions that popped up. So your presentations, as well as that of the Police Bureau today, for me, just really highlights the fact that we need to be a lot smarter about how we utilize existing resources, and that includes diverting calls, delegating work, and outsourcing some of the work when we're able to. I am a huge proponent of 311. I think we absolutely need it, and we need to invest in it now. We are not doing an adequate job communicating with the public, serving the public, and I agree, we also need a lot of public education as the commissioner in charge of transportation. That's something I'm always thinking about. So 311 is going to be expensive and time consuming, and I want to just suggest in the meantime that we could consider a simple fix that might help with the volume of non-emergency calls coming into 911. A lot of people don't know that police non-emergency line exists, and even if they do know it exists, they don't know the number, and frankly may not be willing to take the 10 seconds to look it up.
But that gets answered by 911 as well. It's the same.
Yeah, the
So could we
non-emergency
have-
line comes directly to us. It's just prioritized lower than 911 calls.
Okay, so there's no way, I mean, I was just going to suggest that we have another simple 3-digit number for people to call for non-emergency issues that don't go to our
Yeah, most of the
BOEC
issues that
operators.
that 311 would be used for would be referral calls. We get an awful lot of calls, whether they're through the 911 line or the non-emergency line, that can very easily be passed on to 311.
Yeah.
And it really is, in order to prevent those calls from coming into BOEC, that's where 311 would need to be stood up, and we'd have to have the public education campaign so the public knows which number to call for which service they need.
Okay.
Bobby Regan, I think along the same lines. I was pleased to hear about the CTE, and since most of you don't get involved with education, they are looking at funding Measure 98 for the CTE programs more robustly this year, which would expand those opportunities. I've been talking about recruiting this whole last few weeks and reaching out to schools. And I personally, as a member of the David Douglas School Board and knowing in-depth knowledge of who to contact for what, that I don't need another meeting, but I would be happy to serve and help the city help develop a more efficient way of reaching out to the schools and connecting people so that when you're wanting to get some education going in the high schools, we're looking at 50% of our population not considering college. So out of 3,000 students, that's quite a few. So I'd be more than willing to help in that area.
Excellent. Dr. Smith?
Just really quickly, a clarification, I think, from fire. You used the term sub-community, and
I'm sorry?
You used the term sub-community, and I was curious about, and then the equity work that triggers me.
Sure.
So I just wondered what you meant by that.
What I meant by sub-community is the way our city's set up for fire service is we have what's called fire management areas, and they're geographic locations, 31 stations throughout Portland. So within each FMA, there are sub-communities within that. So that's what I meant by that
Okay,
term.
that's good.
Yeah.
And then the other piece was for emergency communication around sort of equity, and this is just a thought. And so thinking about sort of a body of people, I guess, so to speak, as a way in which we get at equity, I would just suggest thinking more systemically about that, and just the way, and not just the way it's presented here. That's what it makes me think about. And how sustainable is that as we're thinking sort of like across a system, across the bureau, what's happening with equity. And so those are conversations that we can engage in.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank so much Interim Director Patterson and Interim Director Gillespie for both of them stepping up in a way to show real leadership as we're going through trying to get permanent directors for those positions. And I want to say to Director Kazi publicly, the turnaround that you've made to 911 has been pretty phenomenal, and I'm very grateful for all of you working as hard as you do and your passion and commitment to the city of Portland. So thank you all.
Thank you.
We're well served. Thank you to you, and thanks to everyone in the room. Commissioner, thank you for an excellent presentation. We are adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the special closing. I'm going to build this up. The special closing. Jessica.
All right. Well, thank you. I know everybody has put a ton of time and effort and energy into these presentations, so I want to thank everybody for your time and focus. I know that even though there was a lot of time dedicated, we were only able to scratch the surface of our, $5 billion plus total city budget. So our office will be following up with additional questions, additional information. We'll send it to all work session participants. If there's anything else that you feel like you would like addressed or you have a question, please reach out to me. We can facilitate the information. Next steps, we have our first of 3 April budget outreach events tonight. Then the mayor will be working on his proposed budget. He will release it, scheduled to release May 1st. And we have our approved budget work session with all of council on May 14th.
Could you just give the public information about the two opportunities for general public input?
Yes, so tonight will be a town hall forum with open public comment. It is held at ERCO over on Southeast Gleason near Gateway. And that will be from 6:30 to 8:30 this evening. The next forum is this Saturday from 10 a.m. to noon. And that is at it's PCC Cascade, thank you. And we will have some invited and dedicated conversation around housing and homeless services, followed by open public comment.
Very good. And Director Kennard, I want to thank you and your team for setting up all of these presentations that we've had and working with the Bureau directors to make them meaningful for all of us. Thank you for your excellent work as well. Thank you. Now we're adjourned.